Hello and welcome to another video by Breakout Solutions and Decrypting Crypto. My name is Wasim Debussy and I'm your host. And today I want to be answering some very, very deep questions about the financial system and the free market. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today I will reference some previous videos that we've done. So you probably want to go back and watch those. Now, the big question we're going to answer today is the financial system rigged, and do we really have a free market? It's a question that a lot of people ask all the time because they're seeing things that just don't make sense. So we're going to dive deep into this today and look at the answer for this. So first of all, people think that there is a free market around the world, especially in America and Western countries, because you can buy and sell. What we're going to dive into today is having a look behind these organizations, having a look at who actually controls the central banks and who actually controls the media. So first of all, and we have spoken about this in the past, and I have referenced this book. If you haven't read this book yet, I'd highly recommend either looking up a summary of it on YouTube, a 5 or 10 minute summary, because it is a 600-page book, doing a book review, or actually reading the whole book. It's very, very fascinating, very eye-opening. Now, in this book, we discussed that the Federal Reserve is number one, neither federal nor is the reserve. Also, when the Federal Reserve was first created, it wasn't supposed to be controlling interest rates. Now, we know all the time that Federal Reserves and central banks control interest rates. We wait for Jerome Powell's announcements. In Australia, we wait for the Reserve Bank announcements for interest. So the interest rates are now controlled by these federal banks, the Federal Reserve banks or the Reserve banks of different countries, which actually, as we know and we've discussed, is actually owned by a handful of families, being the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the JP Morgans of the world. These large banks, Citi, these large banks, large families, trillion-dollar families, they're the ones that actually control the central banks. And if they're controlling the central banks and not the free markets controlling the interest rates, so how is money really valued? How do we know the real interest rate that's supposed to be out there? It all comes from the Federal Reserve. Now, this just that one point, and as well as the point of, we also know about quantitative easing. We know that banks print money, reserve banks print money out of thin air. We've seen this during the pandemic. We've seen this in other times. Whenever the government needs money, they just go to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve prints money out of thin air, lends it to the government. The government gets in debt, starts paying them interest, and this is why we have a debt-based system. Now, those 2 points by themselves should be enough for anybody to know that whether or not the financial system is rigged and whether or not we have a free market. But let's go further than that. If you haven't heard of BlackRock and Vanguard, I'd highly recommend you look into it. BlackRock is one of the largest companies in the world. They're almost nearing $10 trillion market cap. And they are they own pretty much assets in so many different companies. Vanguard is another company like that, and they also own assets in the majority, if not all, of the publicly listed large corporations. So let's have a look at, how much does Vanguard actually own of BlackRock, and how much does BlackRock own of Vanguard? So according to Capital.com, Vanguard Group owns about 9.04% of BlackRock, and according to Zipper Capital, my bad. So BlackRock owns 9.40% of Vanguard, and Vanguard owns 8.1% of BlackRock. So as you can see, they are both intertwined, and this is one of the biggest challenges that that we face, because these two organizations are intertwined, that have majority share in each other or large share in each other, and they own so many other corporations. So the people in charge of those two companies are the ones making decisions that affect others. So we're going to look a bit more into this and look at exactly what Vanguard's holdings and the Vanguard and BlackRock holdings are. So if we look here at BlackRock's top 10 holdings, they own $81.7 billion of Microsoft, $69.9 billion of Apple, Amazon 52.9, Facebook 26 billion, J&J, Johnson & Johnson 25, Google I don't know what Google L is, but anyway, 23.6 and 23.4. and on and on. This is the what's his name? The company, Warren Buffett's. I can't remember the name of it right now. Visa and JP Morgan. So these guys own very large portions of these very large influential companies. Now, on top of that, we also know that in terms of the ETF market, Vanguard and BlackRock own about 65% of the ETF market. If you add State Street in there, you're looking at around 80%. So, these guys are owning a lot of these. They have a lot of power out there. Now, when you start to looking at this, you start realizing, hang on, all this stuff seems to be centralized, which goes back to the argument that we have, which is around decentralization is the answer. The more decentralized these businesses and all these things are, the less people at the top have power to make decisions that affect everybody around the world. Now, also what many people don't know is there is about 4 or 5 families around the world, as I mentioned before, like your Rockefellers, like your Rothschild, like your JP Morgan. Some of these families are they're trillion-dollar families, okay, and they own and control the majority of the world's financial system. Now, over here, we're going to look at this guy. His name is Jacob Rothschild, and he says, my family is worth $500 trillion. We own nearly every central bank in the world. We finance both sides of every war since Napoleon. We own the news, the media, the oil, and your government. And you have probably never heard of me. So this is who these guys are, the Rothschilds. There are videos of him. There are interviews of him. They're the richest people in the world. They're your globalists, your elitists, and they have control over the central banks and therefore control over, obviously, governments. Now, another way is to look at the interconnectivity and why the financial system and the free market doesn't really exist, why the financial system is rigged, and why the free market doesn't really exist, is we can look at directors. And when we look at directors and what positions they hold in other companies, you'll be able to see that a lot of these directors are actually, a lot of these companies are intertwined. So let's have a look at this. We're looking here at 10 different people, okay, across a number of different sectors, including big pharma, big food, big entertainment, automobile, computers, big banks, military complex, big retail, and as well as big insurance. So if we look at these guys, this guy number 1, James Quincy, is the CEO of Coca-Cola, but sits on the board of directors of Pfizer. Number 2, which is Maria Elena Massimo, she's the board director of Coca-Cola and Disney. Number 3 is the general manager of GM, which is Mary Barra, and she's also a board member on Walt Disney, and on and on and on. Like even if we look at Athen board member is also CEO of Hewlett Packard. So if you follow this around, you'll see that they're all intertwined. Now, this is only a very, very small sample. For every company has a board between 10 to 20 different people. So if we were to have all the boards on there, then look at all the links, we would have about 200 different companies, all controlled by about 15 to 20 people. Okay, or maybe 30 or 40 people. So you'll see a handful of people that control a large portion of these corporations. So as you can see, when you're looking at this, you start to think, well, hang on, is this really a monopoly? Is it really a free market? You start to ask these questions as to who's really controlling what. And the more you dig deep into this, you start seeing how a lot of these companies work together and collude together to control prices and so forth. The next thing that I want to talk to you guys about is around the value of the dollar and the value of money. How do we know, how does the World Bank and the IMF and the central banks, we look at all of that, like how do we know that, $1 is equal to 80 Indian rupees, for example? Who makes that calculation? How is that done? That's number one. That's one question. But also another question is, to look at, we've spoken about the way the IMF and the World Bank works, they give loans to countries that put them in a worse situation. And if these countries can't pay off these loans, then they have to give them their natural resources. This is how they control developing countries and have power over them. So they give them these loans, they can't pay it, and then if you can't pay, you've got to give them natural resources. They roll over the loan, give them more money and more interest to be able to pay it. For example, if we look at Brazil, back in 1987, Brazil had a $53 billion debt. And over the decades, it has paid about $262 billion of debt. And by 2007, they still had $243 billion of debt. So the amount of debt that they continuously put onto developing countries is what keeps them under their control. Then you've also got the BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlements. The Bank of International Settlements is a bank that is controlled by about 63 world banks or central banks around the world that control about 95% of the world GDP. Now, when you've got a bank that's this strong and it's owned by these people, and they're the ones that, their mission is for international trade and international settlements. So they're in control of most of the world's trade and most of the world's settlements. When you look at it this way, you start to question, everything seems to be so concentrated by a small handful of unelected officials that control the world. They control the financial system, they control the corporations, they control the businesses. And the last thing that we want to look at is who actually controls the media. And I'm going to just share my screen again here and just go through one thing or a couple of things. So first of all, we've got a massive consolidation of media with about 90% of media now owned in a very small six or seven companies or so. So you got GE that owns Comcast, NBC, Universal Pictures and Food, Focus Features. News Corp owns Fox, Wall Street Journal, New York Post. Disney owns ABC, ESPN, Pixar, Miramax, Marvel Studios. Viacom owns MTV, Nick Jr., Bet, CMT, Paramount Pictures. Time Warner owns CNN, HBO, Time, and Warner Brothers, and CBS has Showtime, Smithsonian Channel, NFL, Jeopardy, and 60 Minutes. But on top of that, if you look a little bit deeper, where does the news and the mainstream media get their information from? They get their information from two main sources. Number one is Reuters, and that's the biggest news agency news agency in the world. And number two is Associated Press. Now, the Rothschilds own Reuters, and then Reuters also owns Associated Press. So it goes back again to the people that own the central banks and they also own the media. This is why we end up with things like what I'm about to show you. We're going to end up with a video. We end up with social media or mainstream media all sounding the same. Let's have a look at that.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So you can see why this is now sounding dangerous. We've got so many media outlets saying the same thing over and over again and giving the message out to the public. You can see how this is going to condition our society. Now, you're probably sitting there asking yourself a lot of questions, and you're probably thinking, well, Wasim, what's the answer? Why are you bringing this to our knowledge, and what can we do about it? Well, the first thing that you can do is what we have been talking to you guys about this whole time, which is getting into decentralized currencies that cannot be controlled by anyone. And the number one decentralized currency that cannot be controlled by anyone is Bitcoin. And the reason for that is Bitcoin is decentralized. There are computers all around the world. I run my own node to protect the Bitcoin network here. So people all around the world have miners, have nodes that protect the Bitcoin network. So not one single entity has control. When you take away the power of money from people, then you have your own power and control over your money. You are no longer needing to answer to those that are out there. So you can do that through gold, silver, and Bitcoin. And I've given you guys why Bitcoin is, in my opinion, the superior option, because obviously it's transportable, it's digital, and it's unconfiscatable. So there's a lot of different reasons and benefits to Bitcoin. Thank you very much, guys. That is all I have time for today. Wishing you a great day, and as I always say, stack sats and sack banks. Peace out.